What's up, everyone? Renfail here. Welcome to my channel if you are a new viewer. Today we're going to be diving into the class overview guide for Diablo 4. Specifically, this is like the beginner's guide to which class should I play. And my guides are a little bit different than things you might find from bigger channels because I don't focus on like what's the top DPS so you're going to be the best PvP build, or what's the top DPS so you could be the best one doing the thing and getting on the top of the charts and getting all the things and raw Paragon and raw level 100 as fast as possible. Raw. I don't do any of that. Instead, I like to focus on my background, which is in RPGs, tabletop, and MMORPGs, where it's a little more important to focus on, what is the feel for the class? How does this feel to play? Do I think I'm going to like this because it's a melee build, or am I going to like this because it's a ranged build, or is this going to be fun for me because there's lots of explosions and so on and so forth? That's kind of what I focus on. So if that all sounds good to you as we go through this guide, hopefully you'll like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update as we dive deeper into Diablo 4 now that the game is out. On top of that, I would say that if you want to watch any of the live streams, make sure to tune in. I am streaming this game a lot now that it's finally officially launched. And of course, as always, a lot of my guides, like this one in particular, will not feature any combat. So we're not going to be going through the combat for the Barbarian or the combat for the Necromancer. What does the combat look like for the Sorcerer? Instead, if you want to see the combat for each one of these, you'll want to check out the individual class guides that I do, as well as any live streams when I'm playing, so you can check out all of these classes in action. I'm currently playing a Rogue for my first playthrough. I'll then be doing a Sorcerer for my second playthrough. A Druid is my third, and then I'll be doing probably the Barbarian and the Necromancer last. I've tested all of these out in beta, and now that we're live, I'm actually getting around to doing overviews and stuff. And because this is a beginner's guide, we don't need to talk about all the advanced features of each one of the classes. So again, that's all going to be in the class guides. So without further ado, let's dive in. So the Barbarian is going to probably be, in my mind, one of the easiest to play because it's just straight up whirlwind slaughter of everything in your path. And I feel like you don't have to worry too much about taking damage. I mean, obviously every class in the game has to worry about taking damage, and some would argue that like maybe the Necromancer is the best at doing life taps and self heals and everything else. But I feel like for sheer survivability, I think the Barbarian is one of the easiest to play because it's basically just about, as it says here, relying on brute force to subdue your enemies. You've got an array of weapons to choose from, and then they give you a brief overview of the things at your disposal, like Berserking, Bleed, Walking Arsenal, or an Unbridled Rage. But really this class is just all about getting in the middle of things and just tearing everything down, and I mean literally feeling like Conan the Barbarian, where you don't really get affected by a lot of what's going on. Now, some of this is going to be determined whether or not you're playing on the Tier 1 difficulty versus Tier 2, Tier 3, so on and so forth. I'm not really here to get into the nuances of how this class plays in each one of those tiers, because it's going to be different also based on your particular play style and how do you approach each combat scenario. But I would say that if you're just starting out with this game for the very first time and you're a beginner, which is kind of what this guide is geared towards, you're going to be on Tier 1 difficulty anyway. And this is a really easy class to play because you could just get into it and just chop your way through everything. But it is a melee build, so that's something to keep in mind. If you like melee classes, the Barbarian is definitely going to be what you want to play. Next up, we have the Necromancer. Now, if you've ever played a Necromancer in another RPG, MMORPG, etc., this one's going to feel very similar. It is obviously all about having minions at your control, but there is obviously the spellcasting component, and specifically speccing this character how you want is one of the keys to having the most fun you're going to get out of it. But a lot of people will argue that there are a couple of different ways you'll really want to focus on if you want to get the most out of like the life taps and the AoEs and being able to just wade into the thick of it and feel like you're a barbarian even though you're not, because you are quite a bit more squishy. I love the description. The enigmatic necromancers are custodians of the balance between life and death. They can raise powerful undead armies to fight for them while also wielding the powerful magics of bone, shadow, and blood. Now, the Necromancer is one of those that's had quite a few balance patches done to it over the course of the betas, and I know some people have complained that the undead minions aren't nearly as powerful as they were, say, a few months ago, but that's just the nature of a game as a service. Things are going to change as time goes on. So, this build, as I'm recording this, is the day after the game came out, so we are, whatever today is, June 6th? Well, I guess this is actually officially launch day, but it came out on June 5th for those of us in the US. Anyway, so keep that in mind when we're talking about dates for everything. You do get undead at your disposal, but the bones skills are a lot of fun because they get enhanced power when you have larger amounts of essence, which gives you the chance to do big booms, and that's a lot of fun. Darkness is your DOTs. It's sort of like crowd control a little bit, but it's also damage over time. So that's a lot of fun to get into. But blood is the one that a lot of people like to focus on because it siphons life from enemies with blood magic, which has defensive benefits while becoming more powerful as you increase your maximum life. So I would argue that the Necromancer is probably one of the more advanced classes to play in the sense that it requires a little bit of sort of doing different things in the middle of combat and sort of keeping an eye on your, if you're, especially if you're going the blood magic and darkness and stuff and worrying about crowd control and the like, as opposed to just wading into the middle of it and AoEing everything down. It is a little bit of a dance in terms of figuring out exactly what's going to work for a given encounter, but as you get deeper into the specs, as with any of the builds, you're going to find that the character becomes a little more powerful as you go along and has more survivability, especially if you're focusing on blood magic and getting those nice juicy life taps. But again, it's more about do you like being a creepy dude who walks around with undead creatures? Because that's really what the Necromancer is at the end of the day. Now, the Sorcerer is my second favorite class in the game so far. I typically don't play mages in games or sorcerers in games. I tend to choose ranged, which, by the way, the ranger is the first one I'm doing, or the rogue, but as a marksman. The Sorcerer is all about making things blow up, and it is extremely satisfying to play. Whether you're solo or with a group, just watching things burn to a crisp, it's a lot of fun. And this is one of the first games I've ever played where I've actually enjoyed myself immensely playing the caster. Because again, traditionally I don't really play casters. It might be my third or fourth alt, but if I'm playing like an RPG, I'll traditionally go through as a rogue first, a ranger second, and the third build will possibly be a mage, but it's usually a druid. So, like I said, it's usually the fourth or fifth thing I do is like a mage or a sorcerer. It's a very simple description. Master of Elements, sorcerers inflict cold, fire, and lightning damage to your enemies. And of course, you do choose. Are you going to go frost build? Are you going to go fire build? Are you going to go lightning build? And ultimately, that's going to be up to you and what you like the most. So, shock, as it says here, the skills will reduce your cooldowns and etc. And it's, all of these have AoEs, but shock does a lot of raw damage. The pyromancy skills are the ones that are going to give you the most DPS, but the least amount of survivability. But you just burn things to, ashes extremely quickly. Frost is probably the least of the DPS specs for the sorcerer, but it's still extremely potent. But this one's more about the survivability because you're going to be slowing everything down, freezing things, locking them in place so that you can kill them from a distance. So bear that in mind. If you just want to watch things blow up, it's probably going to be pyromancy. But of course, you could spec this however you want, depending on which element you think is going to be the most beneficial to you and your playstyle. I know, for example, I like to go Frost, but I know when I was playing through beta and Chris was sitting with me watching me play, she really enjoyed the fire side of things, or the pyromancy, so just something to keep in mind. Hey everyone, Renfail here with the commercial part of the video where I say, hey, if you like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. And thanks to all of our supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, our highest members, our guild champions, Crazy's Relative, Remy D here on YouTube. And don't forget, if you want to support, it's really easy. You can do the memberships below, the Adventurers Guild, 3 different tiers. There's also the super thanks on any uploaded video or YouTube short that you find. There's also, of course, the super chats and stickers that you could do on any live stream or premiere, and the Patreon page if you want to dive into the fantasy world that I have with my brother and my wife, which is a tabletop game, a point-and-click adventure game, and a fantasy book series. All are great ways to keep this channel going and me going full-time. Thanks again for those of you who support. Let's get back to the video that you're watching now. Next up, we have the Rogue, who is my favorite so far. I traditionally will start any RPG I play as a Rogue, but in RPGs, you're dealing with, trap disarmament and opening locks and so on and so forth. That's not really a thing here. Instead, you have to choose between either going for a melee build or a ranged build, and I have chose to go with the ranged build, which is called the Marksman. This is the first that I'm playing here. So the Rogue, as it says here, uses whatever tools are available to get the job done. They are agile and resourceful, fighting at range with bows or close-up with daggers. And you do have both of those. You can equip both types of weapons at the same time. And because you do get 5 abilities to map out, you can have a couple of ranged and a couple of melee abilities if you want to sort of ride that balance of dancing between the 2 different styles, kind of like you would with the Necromancer, or maybe even with the Sorcerer if you wanted to blend a little bit of frost with fire. But I'm choosing to go full-on Marksman, which is everything is ranged. And it says here, like Marksman, it talks about, benefit from critically striking enemies and causing them to become vulnerable. That is important in the later tiers of difficulty, but it's not going to be so important on tier 1 because you're just running around and just slaughtering things anyway because of the reduced difficulty, which is great if you just want to have fun. I'm personally, my first playthrough of the game, I'm playing on tier 1 difficulty. I don't feel the need to be extremely challenged. I just want to have fun. And it is extremely fun for me to just run around and pew things with a bow. However, the daggers are quite satisfactory as well, or the swords, whichever you choose to use, because you can also get into imbuing your weapons with poison, cold, or shadow, which are doing additional damage to enemies. And of course, there's traps. Now, I haven't actually gotten into using traps yet. This is more for people who want to be a little more strategic in their playthrough of the Rogue, where you have a variety of traps to choose from, and especially if you're wanting to have more of a crowd control build where you're slowing targets, or you want to add a little bit of DPS by poisoning your targets. Traps can be very effective. I just haven't gotten into using them yet, and I need to add them to my repertoire. So as I get deeper into the game, and as you watch me play and stream and create more guides, you're going to see me talking about this more in greater detail, so hopefully we'll be following along for that. But for me, I think the Rogue, it's mostly, in my opinion, especially if you're playing the Marksman build, about staying away from the enemies, keeping a distance. If you're going to go for the melee build, you're going to be wanting to do a lot of avoidance and dancing in and out of combat to avoid taking tons of damage, because you're not going to have the survivability of the, say, Necromancer with the blood magic, or the Berserker who's just like, raw, die. So keep that in mind. This one is a little more, I would say, movement-based, regardless of which way you're playing. So you're going to be doing a lot more running around, but it's still extremely satisfactory. I love it. It's my favorite. The Druid. This is one of the more controversial classes, especially throughout the beta, because a lot of people have said that this class is not fun to play during the early levels of the game. Now, I don't necessarily hold that point of view, because I think that all of these are fun to play. If I rank these, and I will be doing another ranking video that explains things in greater detail, my personal preference is the Rogue first, the Sorcerer second, the Druid is third on my slot. If you want to know what the fourth and fifth are, we'll be talking about that more in the other video. But for me, I don't like the shape-shifting component of the Druid. that's something that some people do like. So when we go to the overview here, it talks about how druids harness the power of nature to protect life. They can shapeshift between the werewolf and the werebear, or those who prefer spellcasting can unleash earth and storm magic from a distance. I'm a big fan of the earth and storm magic, so I really enjoyed that when I was playing through the beta, and I think this is an interesting class because you get two. It's basically, actually, it's more than two. It's three distinctly different ways to play this class. Do you want to be the werewolf, which is the attack speed and being more about a DPS type of melee character, or do you want to be the werebear, which is more about kind of like being a barbarian in a sense? It describes it very well. You're a powerful force in the battlefield, dealing damage in large areas while also being notoriously difficult to take down. Um, Both of those are fun, but they are not as fun in my mind as the storm magic. Storm is incredibly fun because you're calling, you're calling lightning down upon your enemies from the sky, and so it's different than the lightning of the sorcerer. This is not innate power. This is you actually harnessing the power of nature. So all the visual effects are extremely different. You got the wind abilities as well. It's a lot of fun to just play and see visually. And again, if you want to see the combat in action, check out the class guides for the Druid here on my channel. Earth magic is a little less. It's a little less visually satisfying because it's more focused on crowd control. But you can also do a lot of damage to enemies who are under the effects of earth magic, which it can be. I would argue that it's not it's definitely not the DPS aspect of the druid, but it still does a significant amount of damage. But you may find yourself blending a little bit of earth with storm if you're going to go the spell casting route for the druid. But I know a lot of people don't like the spell casting; they prefer to do the shape shifting of the build. But it's just going to be up to you and what you think you want to get out of the druid personally. Well, there you have it, everybody. That is my ultimate beginner's guide to the classes of Diablo 4. Hopefully it's helped give you a little bit of information on how these all play and the style of each one of these. Obviously, we're just kind of looking at the overview for each one of these and saying, yeah, this is kind of, I'm adding a little bit of extra nuance to what they already talk about when you're looking at how the character plays. But again, like I said, my guides are a little bit different than other people's builds guides. So if you want to actually talk about the nuances of each one of these classes and how they play in combat, hopefully I'll see you in one of the other videos, and hopefully I'll see you online when I'm streaming. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. See you next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe and have fun in Diablo 4. Don't get bit.